Okay, we are back on at 12:48, and we have our final panel, which is the San Francisco Bay Regional Shoreline Adaptation Planning. We have Jessica Fain from BCDC, Summer Bundy from OneShoreline, Colleen Corrigan from SPUR, Megan Brotherton from Black and Veatch, and Emma Koeze, Director at Coastal Quest. Welcome, panelists. Thank you very much for being with us. Jessica Fain, I think you will have the leadoff hitter, and you're the person that's the key person on our shoreline adaptation planning. How are we doing?
Thanks, Stas, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to answer that question in my presentation. My name is Jessica Fain. I'm the Director of Planning at the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and we're going to kind of bring it back home a little bit for this last panel. I'll be contextualizing what's been going on in sea level rise planning and adaptation in San Francisco Bay, and try to help answer that question. Hopefully everyone had more than 5 minutes to get some lunch in and you're feeling refreshed and rejuvenated to take on this last portion of the day.
Ready for your slides?
Yes, ready for my slides. You can go to the next one. One back. Yep, there we go. Okay, thank you. So as I'm sure many of you know, the Bay shoreline is not a static thing. It's been evolving as long as the Bay has existed. But human intervention has accelerated the pace and scale of this change. So BCDC was created in the mid-60s to help manage this change at a time when it was rapid and extreme due to the filling of the Bay. And so as our shoreline continues to change due to sea level rise and new forces at play, BCDC is a natural fit for continuing to think about how we manage this important resource that we all work and live around. So for those unfamiliar with BCDC, we serve both a planning and permitting function. On our regulatory side, we permit shoreline development, habitat projects, dredging, and more. And we also do a lot of planning on regional issues, but with a big focus on sea level rise. So our newest work is really supporting and reviewing local sea level rise plans. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that today as we kind of give you a status update on where things stand. Next slide. So one thing you may not think about when you kind of think about the map of California is that San Francisco Bay is about a third of the California coast, but it actually represents about 2/3 of where the economic impacts of sea level rise will be felt in California. It's kind of a remarkable thing to think about, and that's really due to our unique geography, where and how we've urbanized and industrialized our shoreline over time. And that's a lot of where the flood risk is that we see today. In addition to waves and water and high tide overtopping the shoreline, we're also facing erosion to our shoreline edges, beaches, and wetlands, as well as the issue of groundwater rise. Sea level rise, of course, is not just a flooding issue. It's also an economic issue, a housing issue, a transportation issue, and an equity issue. And so what we're trying to do is think about how we weave those important regional issues together as we plan for the future of our shoreline. Next slide. We also know that it's going to be expensive. A question we often get is, how much is it going to cost to adapt? And so a few years ago, we embarked on a study with our partners at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and ABAG to try to put, try to figure out what that figure is. And, one thing about these numbers on the screen here is that they are just estimates, but I do think they give a good ballpark for the kind of costs that we are likely to see or need through about the year 2050. So this $97 billion figure is the estimated cost of flooding and sea level rise adaptation. If we're to protect and adapt all of our shorelines to 4.9 feet of sea level rise and flooding. And then, of course, it's pales in comparison to the cost of inaction, which we estimate to be around 230 billion. So the message is clear. We needed to do something. We stand to lose much more if we don't act. Next slide. About 2 years ago, the legislature passed a really important law called SB 272. This new law requires local governments along the bay and the coast to develop sea level rise plans for their cities. And it requires BCDC in the Bay and the Coastal Commission on the Outer Coast to develop guidelines for what should be in those plans. And then once the city develops that plan, it requires BCDC or the Coastal Commission to review and approve those plans. Projects that are contained within these plans are prioritized for state funding. So that's really the carrot in this proposal. And we're really excited about this new law at BCDC. We think it's a really great vehicle to ensure that cities around the Bay aren't just addressing sea level rise within their city limits, but are really thinking about the regional issues and how they're connecting to one another. So our commission took a major step last December when it adopted the first ever Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan, or what we call the RSAP for short. And the RSAP does three main things. First, it lays out a vision for the Bay. We call this the One Bay Vision. It then identifies 8 strategic regional priorities. These are like the big moves of things we as a Bay Area need to be thinking about as we're adapting to sea level rise. And then lastly, it provides these guidelines for how local governments should prepare their sea level rise plans and what's required and the process for doing that. So our work right now and what we've been doing over the last year is really to work with the over 50 cities and counties that touch San Francisco Bay to help them develop their own sub-regional plans by a legislative deadline of 2034. And we're really doing as much as we can to try to make this happen. Next slide. So here's a pretty image of what this One Bay vision really tries to do and how it brings our regional adaptation goals to life. There's 8 key areas that sort of paint the picture of like what we're working towards. Healthy and vibrant communities, thriving baylands, shorelines that are adaptable and designed for change, reliable critical services, equitable shoreline access, safe and resilient and reliable transportation, protection from contamination, risks, and strong regional collaboration. So each of these topics is associated with one of these strategic regional priorities, these key issues that we think are important throughout the region. Next slide. I'm not going to go into this one too much, but it's a bit of an overview of what's actually in these guidelines. Like any plan you've probably seen before, there's some requirements, how the plan was developed, what are the existing conditions, how you do a vulnerability assessment. But the meat of it is really around supporting governments to come up with these adaptation strategies, think about their land use and policy that they can use to implement them, think about the projects that are most important and the funding for those projects and provide some conceptual project ideas. And throughout it, we developed some minimum standards that we were hoping folks will use throughout the planning process to give some consistency so that we're all sort of speaking the same language. Next slide. The adaptation strategy standards, if you're going to read the RSAP, which I highly recommend that you do, but if you're going to read one section of it, I highly recommend that you read this one section on adaptation strategy standards. It's on page 154 if you want to look it up. But basically, there are 20 different adaptation strategy standards. They fall into 3 different categories. And this is what we're really going to use to help reconcile how to think about what might make sense in a different place. Obviously, you cannot do wetland adaptation everywhere. And so this will be sort of the tool that we use to help us navigate those issues. And I'm just going to name 2 that I think are important to sort of the questions around ports and our maritime infrastructure. One is that we want folks to prioritize uses that require a location on the shoreline. There's certain things that we do on our shorelines that can't be done anywhere else. And it's important that things like ferry terminals, ports, marinas, motorized and non-motorized boat launches, fishing piers, etc., are all things that we want to see happening and using this unique area along our waterfront. And the other one I wanted to highlight is around maintaining our regional networks that facilitate the reliable movement of people and goods. In order for ports to function properly and our transportation network to function properly, we need to figure out ways to make sure that it is prepared for more water in the future. So next slide. BCDC is not a granting agency, and later today, Emma is going to share a lot more about this, but I just wanted to say that we've been really grateful to work with our partner state agency, the Ocean Protection Council, and their SB1 grant program. This is a wonderful opportunity to get grants in the hands of cities to get these plans going. To date, over 15 San Francisco Bay subregional plans have been funded, representing about $20 million. And I think that represents, and Emma, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it represents about 51% of jurisdictions in the Bay. So we're really excited for this and to see this work going. Next slide. And then lastly, I just wanted to spend a second here before I end on the importance of both the planning work, but also on our regulatory role. Accelerating resilience also requires innovation in our regulatory system. If we want to see these great projects happen, we need to make sure our regulatory system is working well and is both sort of balancing the important natural resource protections as well as making sure that it's efficient and effective. As my boss likes to say, the most important word in BCDC is and, conservation and development. And so this is an area that we've been focusing on as well. Some of this includes things like streamlining our region-wide permit program and more routine projects. There's a proposal that's out for public review right now, and there'll be a public hearing held at tomorrow's BCDC meeting, where we're proposing to do that through some rulemaking. And the idea here is that if we streamline some of these more basic types of permits, it'll free up staff time and resources to work on the more complex ones. If you're interested in that, I urge you to show up at that meeting tomorrow, and we'd love your thoughts. In addition, we're working on important policy issues like how we do more beneficial reuse of dredging and sediment for wetland restoration. Our wetlands are our first line of defense around the Bay. Currently, a lot of that dredge material gets put in deep ocean or in deep water areas, either in the Bay or in the ocean, and we're looking around ways to improve policy to encourage more beneficial reuse of that sediment. We're also looking into some new region-wide permits that may be able to be used for projects like restoration and allowing certain restoration projects of a certain size to be approved administratively. That's something we'll be taking on in 2026. And then lastly, improving our services. In order for permitting to go smoothly, we need to be able to communicate clearly with the applicants that are submitting those permits and make it abundantly clear so that there's no confusion about what needs to happen and when. And we've been doing improvements in that area, both to our website, outlining a clearer pre-application process, and it's an area we're really proud of and focusing on. So in conclusion, last slide is just to kind of put it all together. I think in the Bay Area we can, and hopefully beyond, deliver resilience. But it requires a few things. The first is really an implementation mindset. If we're going to get these projects and efforts done, we need to be thinking about how we get to that finish line. We need to have new and creative models for both funding and partnerships. These are complex, new, and difficult types of projects, and they require creativity at all levels. Despite what's happening at the federal level, we need to continue with science and technical innovation. And then lastly, climate leadership is necessary at all levels. It's great that there's events like this where it's really showing up front and center on your agenda, and we're going to need this if we're going to have a fighting chance to deal with this problem into the future. So thank you, and happy to answer questions.
Jessica, thank you very, very much for your excellent presentation and the way you concisely approach this problem. One of the issues that I would like you to think about is that we need a new approach on dredging. And if we are going to do the nature-based solution strategy, we've got to have better dredging resources, and they've got to be able to move more efficiently. My friend Peter Dreyfus has been talking about using a shallow 20-foot dredger that is uses a one-person operation. And Brenda Gaden and I met with some Dutch dredgers back in 2019, and we were appalled to find out that the Dutch were dredging at a tenth of the price that we were in California. And the green makes the green and undoes the green. And I would love for you to talk to Peter at some point because I think he's got some good ideas. So that's my 5 cents on that. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation and for being here next 2 years in a row. We really appreciate that. So, Summer Bundy. Summer, good afternoon and welcome. And Summer Bundy is the Director of Project Management at the San Mateo Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, known as OneShoreline. Good afternoon, Summer.
Thanks so much, Stas. Todd, do you have my slides? Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time being here today. So like Stas said, I am with OneShoreline. You can go to the next slide. I'm sure folks are familiar with San Mateo County, but we're a population of almost 750,000 people. We have 53 miles of shoreline on both the bayside and the coast side combined. We have 20 incorporated cities and significant reaches of unincorporated county. Regionally significant infrastructure is significantly at risk along our bay shoreline. And we often say that we are the most at-risk county in California from the climate risk of sea level rise. We also have a lot of hydraulically connected bayside creeks and reaches of shoreline that cross jurisdictional boundaries. So areas like Belmont Creek that touch Redwood City, Belmont, and San Carlos, as well as unincorporated county, creating some complicated jurisdictional challenges when we're trying to solve problems of water that does not respect jurisdictional boundaries. And these are just a couple of snapshots of our CoStar future projections of sea level rise on the bayside and the coast side with 6.6 feet of sea level rise, showing that there is significant infrastructure like Highway 101, multiple wastewater treatment plants, BART, rail, electrical infrastructure, bridge landings, all types of things that we rely upon to live our lives here in the Bay Area, as well as the natural habitat, wetlands, and other resources that are at risk. Next slide, please. So recognizing the significant challenge and sort of the inability of individual jurisdictions to tackle the complicated issue of sea level rise, in 2019, local leaders approached the state legislature to form OneShoreline. We are the state's first special district, a countywide special district established to tackle the multi-jurisdictional challenges of flooding, drought, flooding from both precipitation as well as sea level rise. And we were formed to replace the fragmented efforts that were currently in place to tackle this challenge. We are governed by an independent board comprised of city council representative and district supervisors. Next slide, please. This year, we have organized our priorities into 4 categories. The first is working on policy guidance. So we recognize the importance of land use planning, private development, and public infrastructure in helping us to adapt our communities to climate change. And we recognize the role of shoreline adaptation plans and the RSAP requirements that Jessica talked about. We also focus on projects, and this I think was really the genesis of what folks saw OneShoreline doing, is advancing these projects that cross jurisdictional lines to adapt our shoreline to sea level rise. We've also included in projects this year an effort to look at how local jurisdictions, local communities can help make insurance more affordable for property owners and renters. We also operate a flood early warning system that's comprised of rain gauges, tide gauges, and other infrastructure that can alert emergency responders and city officials about the impacts of storms. We have dashboards on 4 creeks that can provide early warning in areas that are known to flood. And then we're very focused on developing ongoing and sustainable funding streams to help implement projects now and into the future. Next slide, please. So flooding is not an abstract issue here in San Mateo County. Here's a sampling of projects of sites from across the county. Significant flooding in the New Year's Eve of 2021 storm shown in the San Mateo picture. In the middle is an area of San Carlos where newly permitted development right up against the edge of a creek across from a stormwater discharge greatly limits our adaptation abilities. King tide flooding in Redwood City, New Year's Eve flooding in San Carlos and Half Moon Bay, and then coastal erosion out on the outer coast side as well. Next slide, please. So one thing that we're very proud of is our 2023 planning policy guidance. This is an effort that is focused on new and substantial private redevelopments. Again, this was developed in response to some permitted developments we were seeing that were really not thinking about the climate future and not leaving room for adaptation. We went through a robust process, circulating an administrative draft among many jurisdictions and agencies. We had a public draft where we received additional comments, and this guidance was adopted by our board in June of 2023. This provides template guidance for cities and other and developers to implement into their specific plans and general plans, as well as their developments, to be thinking about how climate change can be accommodated within these projects. Burlingame adopted an ordinance incorporating many of these measures, as did South San Francisco, and we're seeing increasing uptake of this guidance and reliance on it by development teams. Next slide, please. So now we're turning our attention toward resilient public infrastructure, whereas that earlier guidance focused on private infrastructure. We recognize the importance of our stormwater, wastewater, and road systems in including and incorporating resilience. So we are providing guidance that will integrate climate change, including the state's recommendations on sea level rise, but also the best available science on changing precipitation patterns. This is going to be very San Mateo specific, updating design storms that engineers use to design this infrastructure. And it's going to be practical in terms of being readily integrated into local design manuals and other projects. We also recognize the importance of policy measures. So there will be an incorporation of kind of land use, transfer of development rights, and other approaches that can reduce risks in addition to infrastructure. And we're ensuring that this will be aligned with state policy and best available guidance. And we're developing this through a working group comprised of local public works directors and planning staff. And we'll go through a similar process of circulating it for administrative draft review and public review later next year. Next slide, please. So there's a lot going on the Bayside. I'm going to kind of run down north to south. Maybe I'll highlight first the items in yellow, the areas in yellow, Foster City and the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel. Those are constructed projects. They incorporate some resilience to sea level rise, but are not really designed yet for 2100 conditions. But those are significant investments that have reduced flood risk in the near term. Next are the teal projects. So in Colma Creek, San Francisco Airport, Millbrae Burlingame, Redwood Shores, and Safer Bay down in the southern part of the county, efforts are underway to plan and advance design concepts along each of those reaches of shoreline. And then 3 RSAPs have gotten underway. The Brisbane Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan will be getting underway early next year. It's funded by an Ocean Protection Council grant that Coastal Quest helped us get. And so that'll be getting underway. It will include collaboration with San Francisco to the north, South San Francisco to the south, and Caltrans is an important partner on that one as well, since much of that low-lying shoreline is the Highway 101 frontage. San Mateo is advancing its regional shoreline adaptation plan through a Caltrans resilience grant. They're just getting that effort underway and submitted their notice of intent to BCDC. And then our newest OPC grant will cover the 5 southern Bayside cities, Belmont, San Carlos, Redwood City, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto. And that'll be our first multi-jurisdictional RSAP that we'll be tackling. And the fun and challenge of that one will be threading through all of these ongoing projects like Redwood Shores and Safer Bay into the common framework of the RSAP, while at the same time trying to tackle some of those sticky creek situations that folks have been avoiding. Next slide. Over on the coast side, we have a little bit different engagement. We've helped the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast and the Pillar Point Harbor obtain Army Corps authorizations to advance Army Corps feasibility studies for those areas of risk. We're lobbying for clean closure of the funding to advance clean closure of the Daly City and Half Moon Bay landfills. So working with our elected officials to elevate the importance of tackling those very challenging considerations. We're supporting the county on their efforts to advance Plan Princeton, which is a local coastal plan for the most at-risk residential area along that part of the coast. And then as other jurisdictions request, we're jumping in to provide support or guidance as well. And look forward to additional funding and efforts to be able to be engaged on the coast side. Next slide. And that's what I've got. Thank you so much for our quick spin through San Mateo County, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Summer. As soon as we finish the panel, we're going to go into questions. Our next speaker is Colleen Corrigan from SPUR. She is the Sustainability and Resilience Policy Manager. Colleen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Excited to be joining a star-studded panel. I'll wait for the slides to pop up there. Awesome. Here we go. Well, thanks so much. Yes, as Stas mentioned, I'm a Sustainability and Resilience Policy Manager at SPUR. You can head to the next slide. If you're not familiar, we are the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association, and we're a nonprofit public policy organization based in San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland, although we work across all the 9 counties across the Bay Area. Next slide. Our work entails both research and advocacy, and you can find a number of our reports and on our policy focus areas, including housing, transportation, good governance, and I think most importantly, I might be biased, sustainability and resilience on our website. We take a multi-hazard approach to resilience, so we focus on wildfires, sea level rise and coastal flooding, extreme heat, and seismic safety, which is actually how we got our start in the world after the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. Next slide. So we believe that the region should be environmentally just, carbon neutral, and resilient to climate change and earthquakes. On the hazard resilience side of the house, we focus on empowering local jurisdictions and households to retrofit their homes to meet changing needs in the face of climate change. Next slide. We work with community-based organizations to address issues of groundwater rise and shoreline contamination. I highly recommend checking out this report that my colleague Sarah worked on with Nuestra Casa in East Palo Alto. Next slide. We also more recently are working to support the development of collaborative cross-jurisdictional governance structures like OneShoreline and like Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, a JPA in Marin, which can really help address adaptation and infrastructure resilience needs. Next slide. And lastly, and in the face of federal funding cuts, we're really focusing on financing of emergency management, hazard resilience, and climate adaptation through leveraging not only public financing tools, but also mobilizing private investment and more innovative financing tools, which I will get into later. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're focused on sort of these innovative financing partnerships and initiatives that also improve governance of projects for hazard resilience. So this is just a snapshot of what we've done in the space, focusing on seismic retrofitting. That was a budget ask. We also helped pass and implement Prop 4 and the 2024 Measure MM, which is a special tax for wildfire mitigation in Oakland. And so now we are really focusing our efforts on understanding financing challenges across hazards and identifying gaps and tools to respond to these gaps. Next slide. I won't spend too long on these slides because you all are really the experts on what's forecasted for sea level rise across the Bay Area. But just highlighting the serious risks that it poses to businesses, communities, natural landscapes, and livelihoods. And this is the approach that I think SPUR tries to utilize to bring more people to the table who might not otherwise care about these kind of issues. Next slide. And so as sea levels rise in response to climate change, as many of you know, the salty ocean water moves further inland, pushing groundwater up through the soil and what is known as groundwater rise. And the soil becomes oversaturated. It doesn't have space to absorb more water, and it can lead to the flooding of roads and homes during heavy rains. It also mobilizes harmful contaminants from legacy pollution sources, and groundwater rise can also damage critical infrastructure like sewer systems, roads, and building foundations. Next slide. I also won't spend too long on this since you guys are well aware of the number of adaptation solutions that are out there. I just wanted to highlight some in the toolbox, including kind of thinking about building codes and overlaying groundwater rise zones, and thinking about sort of these design elements. How do we support homeowners in retrofitting? How do we make sure that our building codes ensure that new construction is built to the best possible standard? And then managed retreat is something that we've explored in a couple of our briefs, but just highlighting that there are state voluntary buyout programs in other states. Our focus here from SPUR's perspective is really limiting or de-incentivizing, I think, development within areas of risk of future flooding while increasing density outside of risk. So trying to work with our housing team. And all of these adaptation strategies, excited to see reflected in the RSAPs and everything Jessica and Summer were talking about today. Next slide. I'll actually just skip over this since I think Jessica already outlined just how enormous of a challenge the Bay Area does face. But also highlighting that filling the funding gap will require a mix of funding types and amounts, and these estimates were before the federal funding cuts. Next slide. So of the amount needed for sea level rise adaptation, Bay Area governments can account for just over $5 billion being available through existing federal, state, regional, and local funding programs. Next slide. And actually, I'll have you skip one more. And at the same time, we're facing enormous federal headwinds, as I think other folks have highlighted, including that the EPA is shutting down its Office of Environmental Justice. It's terminated billions of dollars from the federal Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that funds climate and clean energy investments. And these canceled GGRF projects also include resilience hubs, stormwater infrastructure, solar for low-income households, and many grant recipients are now in limbo. Next slide. To be the bearer of more bad news, I think we all are pretty aware of the devastating cuts to FEMA and the sort of systematic dismantling. So just the cuts to the workforce and budget, the hiring freeze, and I think really importantly, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant program cancellation. Next slide. These impacts are already being felt close to home, and they're putting a dent in state-led mitigation planning and infrastructure resilience, including in Menlo Park for the Safer Bay project, and Napa, around the Oakland Alameda Adaptation Committee project, San Francisco's Coastal Resilience Project, you name it. So it's being felt now, and I think jurisdictions are really having to pivot and adapt. Next slide. Also just highlighting this sort of research that we've been doing around financing of other hazards. And we know that at the state level, funding is largely driven by public interest in shortly following disasters. So it still reflects, I think, a shift over time towards investing in resilience activities in high-risk areas before disaster strikes. And this has largely been implemented in the wildfire space. And now I think California really needs to apply this lesson to slower moving hazards like sea level rise, which can take decades, as we know, to create widespread damage. But really, what kind of lessons can we learn from the wildfire resilience space? Next slide. So after all of that bad news, I want to take some time to, I think, focus on the positive opportunities. And some of this is research that came out of a report that we'll be releasing in January on the LA wildfires, and really thinking about what community scale resilience looks like in that space. And there's some innovative financing tools that emerged to us that I think are relevant for this group, even if it doesn't seem like it at first glance. So I'll start with the Forest Resilience Bond, which is a financial tool that brings together private capital and public beneficiaries to pay for forest restoration projects that reduce wildfire risk and improve watershed health. So in this setup, investors like banks or foundations or venture capitalists put up the money to finance forest restoration activities at a much earlier day than normally you can do with a lot of public money. Those timelines are really long and there's not always capacity. And so investors finance that upfront capital, and then project implementers like the U.S. Forest Service are do the actual work. And then beneficiaries in the area, including water utilities, counties, the state, hydropower operators, insurance companies, they repay the investors over time as they fulfill the grants and reap the benefits in terms of lower fire risk and improved water reliability. So I do think this really could be applied to sea level rise and coastal flooding needs. Sea level rise adaptation already has clear identifiable beneficiaries with financial or operational incentives to avoid flooding, erosion, and infrastructure damage. Thinking through this, it's not a fully baked idea, so to speak, but implementers could include BCDC or the Army Corps or the Coastal Conservancy. It could function at the municipal level, where local jurisdictions could be one of the beneficiaries and pay back through grants or financing over time. Other beneficiaries can include airports, utilities, transit systems, waterfront districts, and industrial zones, as well as insurers. Although I think you'd probably need a longer repayment period just because the benefits of sea level rise mitigation accrue more slowly, and the measurement of avoided losses would have to be kind of standardized. Just something to think about. Next slide. Another tool that emerged after the LA fires was the LA Resilience Delta Fund, which is a public-private partnership with blended capital. And so this offers homeowners a variety of grants or loans depending on income level to rebuild to a higher, more fire-resistant standard after the LA fires. Thinking about applicability for sea level rise, I think this could be a useful tool to, for example, build to a higher FEMA or National Flood Insurance Program standard. So funds could be used to finance raising house elevations, floodproofing, reinforcing foundations, doing stormwater upgrades, or retrofitting utilities at the homeowner level, where they would repay those low interest loans or receive grants depending on the income level. Next slide. I'm sure you're all familiar with California's Green Bank, or it's called iBank, but I wanted to spotlight two other green banks that are really focused on sea level rise and flooding. So there's Connecticut, which actually has the nation's first state-run green bank in the US, and it started with a focus on renewables, which is, I think, what people really think of when they hear green bank, especially our green bank. But it expanded in 2021 to focus on climate resilient infrastructure, given their coastal flooding risk. And so future savings from lowered National Flood Insurance Program premiums and lower disaster recovery costs are invested into resilience proactively. And so they're the first state to offer, for example, low interest loans for elevating homes. And I think they're on the forefront of thinking through what this kind of resilience could look like within a green bank. Maryland also has a Green Bank Resilience Dedicated Fund. So they offer low interest loans to affordable housing and housing developers to invest in resilience alongside capital improvements. So I think one of the biggest hurdles to resilience planning is the overall lack of capital, and especially access to early stage capital. And so one of the goals of this fund is to enable developers to make proactive investments to improve resilience that mitigates risk to people and property, instead of just the kind of model of reactive post-disaster recovery. Next slide. Lastly, I think we already heard from one special district today, but just spotlighting the climate resilience districts, which came out of SB 852. This is a new type of financing district that's available to local governments and special districts with the goal of establishing a more predictable flow of money and fostering collaboration. So you can utilize tax increment financing or voter approved property taxes benefit assessments or fees. And Sonoma County has already begun work to establish their CRD through the Climate Protection Authority. And so they're working on the charter. And I think there'll be a lot of learnings that come out of that. And then lastly, the Geological Hazard Abatement District. So they've been formed in areas of California facing increased rates of bluff erosion, beach loss, or storm surges. And so as sea levels rise, I think GADs can be suitable where citizen coalitions or local governments agree on the need for self-funded and kind of mostly autonomous adaptation programs. Next slide. And so I think similar to what other panel participants have really emphasized, I think regardless of whether some of the federal funding sources are restored, we have no choice but to forge on ahead. And so I think now is the time to think outside the box and draw from other hazards and sectors and how we think about financing. Thanks.
Well, Holly, this is really very interesting. And I think it deserves a lot more attention and energy, because if we're going to have planning for shoreline adaptation, we're going to have to deal with the issue of money. And we're also going to have to figure out what our priorities are in terms of those investments. And at one point, Jessica mentioned the need to develop the resources along the water that are most appropriate to the water. And some of that has to go to nature-based solutions, retention ponds, elevation, but it also should be going to elevating new assets so that they anticipate sea level rise. And my problem with a lot of the way that we handle things is that there are 221 different programs, and that doesn't channel a problem that Jessica identified as being in the $100 billion range. And we have got to start thinking about what happens if the feds are absent or not as active as they have been in the past. So what I would like to suggest is that maybe we think about doing a follow-up on this subject to look at finance strategies long-term for Bay Area communities based on both the flooding issue and the fire issue. Because as you're pointing out, it's a endeavor in progress. We learned a lot of lessons from the fires in LA in January, but we can't keep reacting. We have got to get ahead, and we're losing FEMA. So if FEMA is no longer there, then what are we going to do? And Kathleen Schaefer, who's a former FEMA engineer, has argued that there needs to be a partnership with the insurance companies. I'm not so sure. I would love to have a partnership with the insurance companies, but so many of them are leaving California, it's a little difficult to know whether they are still in the realm of being partners. So a few things to think about, but I would love to have us work with you to try and pursue this, perhaps in context of the shoreline adaptation, because if we're asking people to plan, we need to figure out how they're going to pay for it. Anyway, my 2 cents. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Megan Brotherton, Mitigation and Resilience Planner at Black & Veatch. Megan, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much for having us here today. Super excited to be able to present on this topic and following Colleen with these funding challenges and some of the complications that are in the current administration and the process of looking at funding these really important projects. Okay, thank you for putting my slides up. So go ahead and move to the next slide. And the next one. And one more. Here we go. Thank you. So in talking to, one back. In talking to, one more back. There we go. Nope, keep going back, going back the other direction.
Todd, you
We're looking
jumped
for
to
the introduction slide.
All right, let's go back to the front.
There we go, introduction. Oops.
Okay, next one. Okay, there we go.
Okay, that right there. We're good now. Thank you. Oh,
Todd, you jumped again.
I'm just going to start talking, and then
Yeah,
we're
go ahead.
waiting for the introduction slide. So what we have found in mitigation and resilience planning often is that ports are not really aware of what hazard mitigation planning is in the context of the disaster management cycle. And mitigation in disaster management really does have to do with taking sustained long-term and short-term actions to really help protect the people and the places, the infrastructure, the services that are provided in the communities from natural hazards. We're talking a lot about coastal hazards. These are all considered natural hazards and part of that hazard mitigation planning nexus. The purpose of hazard mitigation plans, yep, you're almost there. They're in response to a federal mandate back from the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. And whoops, one back.
No, you went ahead again, Todd. Go back.
And so with these plans tied to the Disaster Mitigation Act, historically, they have opened up funding streams to be able to implement resilience actions, which is so critical because jurisdictions simply do not have the funding to do these high dollar mitigation actions themselves without additional funding streams. We've seen that in conversation throughout the day today. And so what mitigation plans do is open up those funding streams as they currently stand. We know things are shifting with funding eligibility, whether FEMA is going to be the arm to distribute funding in the future or whether it's a different agency. But we do know there are always going to be disasters. There are always going to be hazards and the need to mitigate them. And there will be some kind of funding nexus that is tied to this disaster activity to help communities be more resilient. So some of the communities that we're currently working with that are also part of the port structure, we're currently working with the City of Oakland, and the Port of Oakland here today is a participating agency and really looking at resilience and what that means for the port. Also, currently we're working with the Port of Stockton, an inland port. Still faces a lot of the same challenges that seaports do, but also some of the complications of being an inland port as well and related to natural hazards. So our team has a collective experience of over 150 years in working with jurisdictions, including ports, on mitigation plans and resilience plans to really promote and increase resilience. Next slide, please. Let's see if we can make this work. So we want to look at, there we go, some of the hits and misses, some of the great things. These are just on the left, just a few of the ports that we have worked with, our team has worked with over the years that have participated in mitigation planning efforts and been able to really leverage not just funding, but also the risk assessments and vulnerabilities analysis to make better decisions for resilience. And then on the right, one of the misses that is really painful for California is Port Hueneme. This is well publicized what happened with the 2023-24 atmospheric river event that caused significant flooding and damaged millions of dollars of port infrastructure. This was with the shoreside power system. And what was really disappointing for the port is that they did not participate in the Ventura County multi-jurisdictional planning effort, and therefore were not eligible to apply for mitigation funding to rebuild their infrastructure with more resilience so that it would be resilient in the face of future storm events. So we can see there's a lot of benefit for jurisdictions to participate in planning efforts, whether it's a port or another service provider, to really promote resilience and open those doors for federal funding. Next slide, please. And while mitigation planning in the FEMA nexus really is strictly for the US, of course, risk assessments for international ports are vital for being able to look at projected risk, what types of weather conditions or potential hazards could impact structures, infrastructure, and the ability to provide services. Supply chain interruption is a significant concern and can be analyzed really successfully in risk assessments. So I am based in Hawaii, and supply chain interruption is a huge conversation in an island community, but also in any port area. There's a lot that can be done to look at risk assessments for ports wherever they are in the world. Next slide, please. All right, and next slide, please. So looking at targeted ports for, or targeted hazard mitigation plans for ports is really an interesting topic that many ports have not been conscious of in the past. But when a port participates in a multi-jurisdictional planning effort or a municipal planning effort, it can be a very effective way to promote resilience, but it's not the best way because ports have such complex infrastructure, such complex services. There are, looking at the Port of Oakland, not only is it a maritime port, but also an airport. And looking at the Port of Stockton, not only is it, does it have all of the waterways, but also railways. And so there are a lot of variables that are not able to be addressed in a multi-jurisdictional plan that could be if ports were to develop their own single jurisdiction plan. And by doing a more targeted effort for a port in these hazard mitigation plans, it can take a deep dive into what the critical assets are and how they could be impacted by weather or storm or other hazard events, looking at functional downtime and then being able to plan accordingly for that, being able to develop really targeted specific mitigation actions that could be implemented before a hazard event strikes to make the port more resilient in the face of natural hazards. And some of these are really awesome nature-based solutions. Some are gray-green infrastructure, some are traditional engineering and structural, some are elevation. There are a lot of different types of actions that can be written into these mitigation plans and open up funding streams that are still currently available. And as administrations change, funding changes, it's we are anticipating there's going to be some additional changes, and we'll see where those go and how that funding becomes available for these mitigation actions. All right, next slide, please. So some of the things that that we've heard that we want to dispel about hazard mitigation planning is that it's a heavy lift. There is a lot of work that goes into developing a hazard mitigation plan and really looking at vulnerability and risk assessments and taking into account all of the assets and services that a port provides. But where local capacity is not able to fill these lifts, this is where an experienced consultant comes in, whether it's Black & Veatch or one of the other many consultants that do really excellent mitigation planning, especially in the state of California. There are really excellent opportunities to engage consultants in developing and maintaining these plans. So joining an effort like a multi-jurisdictional plan can be a lighter lift. But as I mentioned in one of the previous slides, it's not as effective for a port. So it dilutes the effort when a port participates in a multi-jurisdictional plan. And these plans are not expensive. For a single jurisdiction plan, they can be just under $200,000. So compared to the funding potential that is opened up by having an approved adopted plan, it's a significant benefit to developing a plan that can be in the just under $200,000 range. And right now, Cal OES is prioritizing mitigation planning grants under the DR 4856, which is that LA wildfire disaster. This grant period has extended, so it's an option for jurisdictions to continue to apply for those mitigation grant funds to develop a mitigation plan. And next slide, please. And one more. And so currently FEMA funding is still tied to having an approved plan. Our team has helped jurisdictions just in California secure over $112 million to implement mitigation projects. So the funding has been in there in the past. We don't know exactly how that's going to be distributed in the future, but there will be a funding mechanism tied to disaster activity. And right now, the focus still is that an approved adopted plan is the means to leverage this mitigation funding. And next slide, please. And that's it. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for having us here.
Megan, thank you very much for this. You've raised some interesting questions that we're seeing a stream of, and I'm going to hold off until the final panelist and then come back. And we actually have a question from one of our attendees. So if you can hold off, we will be back to you in a few minutes. Emma Koeze, Director, Coastal Quest. You are our last but best speaker, I am sure. Welcome.
Oh boy, Stas, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on such a wonderful panel and to see some familiar names in addition. Todd, I'm hoping I can just, oh, you've got it. Thank you. Amazing. Wonderful. I will keep this short and sweet. I'm excited to talk to you all today. I'm a director at Coastal Quest. My name is Emma Koeze, and I'm actually here to talk about available state funding for sea level rise adaptation work. Many of you have heard from me via email and phone calls, and to you I apologize because you're going to hear some similar things today, but we do have a couple of fun updates as well. But before I go on to the next slide and kick things off, in case you have not heard of us, Coastal Quest is a service-focused nonprofit. We're based out of Oakland, and our mission is to work with partners to accelerate solutions to build resilient coastal communities for people, nature, and the climate. We're working with the Ocean Protection Council to lead the Senate Bill 1 Technical Assistance Program to help jurisdictions apply for Senate Bill 1 grant program funding, especially in historically underserved and or capacity-strapped jurisdictions. And we know that a lot of jurisdictions are like, hey, like we have a lot going on, we need some capacity help. That is what we're here for. Yeah, so let's cover it. On to the next slide, please. So before I dive into the grant program and the technical assistance program that Coastal Quest leads on behalf of the Ocean Protection Council, I like to give a little bit of context. Lucky for you all, Jessica and Summer already gave a lot of this context today, but I am going to just be a little bit redundant to make sure that we're all on the same page. So in 2021, Newsom signed SB1, Senate Bill 1 into law. SB1 directs the state to provide funding to local and regional governments to develop their sea level rise adaptation plans and implementation projects to mitigate the effects of sea level rise. While many of you already know, there's a good deal of sea level rise adaptation planning that has been conducted along the coast over the past decade. It is currently pretty well understood that vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans and various coastal resilience projects are not necessarily super consistent in their standards or criteria across various jurisdictions. And yes, ding, 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 this is when SB 272, that was touched on a little bit earlier, was signed into law in 2023. SB 272 mandates that all coastal governments develop sea level rise plans, and by January 1st, 2034, these plans need to be integrated into local coastal plans, or in the case of the Bay Area, these resiliency plans that Jessica was talking about earlier. The Ocean Protection Council, and wow, I'm realizing I say a lot on that one slide, has designed the criteria within the SB1 grant program to be in line with SB 272 through very significant and wonderful consultation with both the Coastal Commission and our friends at Bay Conservation and Development Commission, BCDC, to ensure that the grant sets jurisdictions up for their success on their journey to comply with SB 272. But ultimately, the grant program is meant to provide funding so that jurisdictions, federally recognized tribes along the coast, can develop consistent sea level rise adaptation plans and also build implementation projects along the coast of California and, of course, the Bay. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, what does that actually mean? Where can I get funding? What can it go to support? So let's talk a little bit about what's funded under this grant opportunity. So Track 1 is heavily featured on this slide. Track 1 constitutes available funding for both pre-planning and planning projects. In Phase 1, you'll see that applicants can apply for funding to complete a community visioning, so a project that builds consensus on community priorities, sets goals, and creates a vision for resilience across the community. Likewise, applicants can apply for funds for vulnerability assessments. You'll see on here Phase 2, data collection and information gathering. This is really an opportunity to fill in a missing piece to pre-planning or planning efforts that are underway or have happened in the past and just need a little updating. So the data and information gathering phase needs to support the completion of, for example, a community visioning process, a vulnerability assessment, or be coupled with the development of a plan itself. And that leads us to Phase 3 under Track 1, which is focused on the development of plans. The idea is that applicants define their adaptation frameworks and strategies during this phase, and the result of this phase will be sea level rise adaptation plans compliant with SB 272. Additionally, there is an opportunity to apply for sector-specific sea level rise adaptation plans. Those are very interesting because they might focus on a core sector or two. Core sectors being often very locally specific topics that require significant individual attention and have perhaps been left out of a previous planning effort because it was just too broad. It was covering a lot of different topics across the entire region, and there needs to be something that goes deeper and is more specific. So this has been really interesting for example, certain special districts to pursue. And then you'll see at the bottom of that slide, Track 2 is kind of tucked away, but constitutes Phase 4, which many of you I know have been excited about. This is the actual implementation of projects, shovel-ready on-the-ground mitigation projects. OPC will solely be accepting nature-based and green-gray hybrid adaptation projects, feasibility studies, and designs. And Track 2 is expected to come live in late 2025, so imminently. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on this slide, there's another interesting and relatively new funding opportunity that is open under SB1, known as the tribal track. This might be a little bit less interesting to this particular crowd, but potentially very interesting to tribes in your network. The tribal track is a more flexible funding pathway for tribes than the broader SB1 grant program. Eligible projects will look slightly different than those under Track 1 that we just talked about previously. So for instance, under pre-planning, tribes can apply for projects that identify shared priorities and tribal cultural resources, education and outreach on project-relevant topics and tasks, comprehensive community tribal visioning statement for achieving sea level rise resiliency. A lot of different topics can be covered under this that can't be covered under Track 1. Planning projects build on pre-planning efforts, emphasizing the development of adaptation priorities. Potential deliverables could include, for example, prioritized list of adaptation projects or actions, culturally specific adaptation frameworks or memos, outreach tools for regional partners. And this is by no means a comprehensive list of what is possible, but it's more flexible and it's intended to serve all California Native American tribes that have ancestral ties to the coast. And I will explain this a little bit better on the next slide. So federally recognized tribes have the option to apply to either Track 1 funding or the Tribal Cultural Resources or Tribal Track, depending upon needs. And like I said, all California Native American tribes that have ancestral ties to the coast are able to apply for the Tribal Track. So here are some notable differences between the two to help narrow down which track might be the right fit. The tribal track, like I said, welcome to all California Native American tribes. Track 1 is not, just federally recognized tribes that have legal purview along the coast. The tribal track supports pre-planning and planning projects that support tribal consultation in future land use plans, whereas Track 1 funding must lead directly to the development of a land use plan. The tribal track allows flexibility in how tribes choose to assess sea level rise impacts on tribal resources, including utilizing traditional knowledge, whereas Track 1 funded projects must align with OPC's Senate Bill 1 sea level rise criteria, which are more strict. And the tribal track is pulled from a separate dedicated funding source totaling $5 million, unlike Track 1. So that's another big distinction there. And we'll move on to the next slide to talk a little bit about eligibility. So if you're interested in some of the pre-planning or planning projects under Track 1 that I mentioned earlier, eligibility looks like local governments, regional governments, federally recognized tribes that specifically have legal purview along the coast or the bay shoreline. Organizations or consultants applying on behalf of a government is also eligible to apply, and joint power authorities are eligible to apply. We talked a little bit already about the tribal track and eligibility, but you'll also see it up there. And then Track 2 is interesting and opens the gate a little bit more in terms of eligibility. So you would be eligible to apply for implementation funding if you're a local government, including a special district, regional government, California Native American tribes, state agencies, public or private universities, and you all can see this on the slide already, so I'll stop there. Next slide, please. So in sum, we have Track 1 that's open. We're looking at a funding range between $200K and $1.5 million. The maximum project timeline for that is 2 years. So the expectation is that if you go all the way through the process to complete your plan, it will maximally take 2 years. We have seen a couple of multi-jurisdictional efforts come through that have been allotted a little bit more time. $30 million has come live for 2026. So there's ample funding for planning. We highly encourage you, if you're interested, to apply for technical assistance and lock in some of this grant funding. And I'm going to skip ahead in the interest of everyone's time and to make sure that there's time for questions to the actual technical assistance program itself. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, Coastal Quest is here. We have capacity, and we want to hear from you and offer technical assistance to help you write your grant, to review your grant, to make sure it's in line with SB1 grant criteria, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So what do we offer in addition to what I just described? We can help you conceptualize and develop your project. We can share helpful resources and templates to cut down on how much time it's going to take for you to actually write your proposal. We can talk you through various decisions that you have to make. We can convene you and other jurisdictions to bring you together. So really at your disposal to get these proposals over the finish line. And it is our absolute pleasure. If you don't mind going to the last slide, I will wrap there. My last spiel is the questionnaire is not a huge lift. You can follow it by checking out this QR code here. We advise that you take no longer than 15 minutes to fill it out if you're an eligible entity. We will get back to you within 2 business days and set up a call, conduct intake, and assess your needs based on our capacity and your capacity. Thank you so much for your time, and here to answer any questions now or in future.
That's
Thanks.
great, Emma. Thank you very much. Emery Rowe, you've been waiting to ask a question. Are you still with us, Emery?
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you, Stas. In the interest of time, and what I'd like to do is to end on a positive note. And I want to telegraph ahead. These are so excellent presentations, massive information, just wonderful news to hear. But I want to pick up what is one narrative that I would suggest you can change. One big narrative that out there about the climate change that you can actually change yourselves with the information that you've already provided today. And this is the sort of sticker shock whenever you mention the big numbers. about what it's going to take to build the walls, mitigate, and the billions and billions. If I understand what you are saying today through the presentations, both your presentation panel now and what the port went through, that really isn't you don't really need to talk that way in order to get what I understand, and I'm a policy analyst. What I get to understand is the policymakers' real considerations. So let me focus on the issue of modeling, since it's common to both to you, the port panelists, and to your presentations. It's quite clear that the modeling, there are global climate change models, and then there are global climate change models. In one of the slides that I think it was Sumner who showed, or one of the panelists, you broke down climate change by decade, 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040. Yes, indeed, most models will take you out to the end of the century. But really, there are models of such granularity that are there already that you can do 2030, 2040, 2050. And why is that important? Because based on these models and use of LiDAR and better metrics, you can actually show that investments in infrastructures 10 years out, 20 years out, facing depreciation cycles that are near or already at the end, that in fact, some of this climate change projections can actually pinpoint specific infrastructures. And that's important because if the utilities are not changing their investment streams in light of the best available climate change models, that indicates to policy types that that's a real bottleneck. It isn't the public's acceptance of billions and billions of dollars. It's the fact that you would expect climate change modeling on 2030 and 2040 to affect their own investment streams, be it Caltrans or PG&E. I'm thinking Northern California, SMUD, or any of that. Now, why is that important? That's important because one of the things that you mentioned is the importance of hazard mitigation plans. If you actually do know that or you're available as a public entity, that the companies are responding to their better global climate change models or are not, that is an issue of absolute essential to hazard mitigation plans, regardless of what Trump or anybody funds. Because just as Megan mentioned, these hazard mitigation plans are meant to look at interconnectivities that are not going to go away. Now, my second point, one of the most wonderful presentations I would have flagged today that were really, really interesting to me were the ones that were given about the early warning system, the shoreline early warning system on storm impacts, and the presentation by the port planner showing where, in fact, the high wall was needed with respect to stormwater. You see, what modeling gives you at a granular level isn't that it's just interconnected, multi-jurisdictional, multi-infrastructural. It actually identifies choke points that are choke points because they involve different infrastructures. So for sake of argument, he didn't say it today, but that stormwater area that he identified in San Francisco may in fact also be a confluence of electricity and of water treatment. I'm just saying that.
Okay,
If in
Emery,
fact,
you've got to bring this to a conclusion now.
yeah, the conclusion is that you can actually identify safer areas, not just vulnerable areas, but safer areas from an infrastructural hazardous mitigation planning source. And that will reflect the fact that it isn't billions you require. It is, we can show today the new narrative that we are able to manage reliably with the information we have in order to maintain choke point services even during floods and presentations. This use of multi-billion-dollar scare tactics just isn't going to work. You have to show that people in real time are able to use this information productively, be they planners or infrastructures. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. That is a provocative statement from our good friend who always has a provocative statement every time he comes to speak with us. If I could ask everybody to maybe just touch on, from my standpoint, a strategic approach. I would be less eloquent than Emery, but a strategic approach towards funding and mitigation, and maybe the modeling that Emery's talking about certainly would focus a lot of resources. And let me ask you from Megan, you want to start on that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, something that we find is often really, really helpful for jurisdictions is to do a funding analysis that looks at the priorities of the organization or jurisdiction, where the timeline lines up with those priorities. The timeline, whether it's to meet compliance for a mandate or a particular policy, what the current funding that the jurisdiction has, and then what it needs. And creating a timeline that looks at how that funding needs to be acquired to meet priorities and mandates, and then open it up to look at all of the different funding streams, where the grant application process needs to start, what the time is for the grant window, and whether the project could actually be eligible or competitive, because there's so much competitiveness in these grant spaces. So really doing a funding analysis is critical for jurisdictions to understand. There's so many moving parts in looking at improving infrastructure and structures and resilience, but then lining all of those things up with available funding and looking at the grant application process and window and the duration. And so I highly recommend funding analysis for all of these moving parts to just make it a seamless process.
Okay, very good. Colleen?
Just to clarify, we're responding to the prior statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think what was coming up for me around that is I do think with all things related to overwhelming collective action problems, it's a balance of trying to identify what really is an urgent need, and trying to, when it comes to state budget processes, make the case to lawmakers and people in Sacramento that this demands attention now. And so I think that's probably the intent. At least that's our intent sometimes, using these kind of numbers when we are fighting for increasingly smaller pieces of a pie. When it comes to sort of public facing, adaptation measures in the wildfire space, we have been talking a lot about the messaging around a mitigation measure called like Zone Zero, and it's around defensible space. This is going to mean a lot of change for homeowners, and it might incur costs, and it's going to drastically change the way that people interact with kind of local jurisdictions and even how they landscape their homes. So we're removing vegetation. It changes the way that a home looks. And I think it's a good example because there are a lot of great examples out there for trying to have positive messaging around what this could look like. So showing pictures that depict, kids playing in a yard that has like drought resistant landscaping, positive images, or like, I think also recognizing that people come to these issues with different kind of even like social emotional baggage, so to speak. And so when we talk about mitigation and adaptation for sea level rise, we are asking people to also rethink the way that they think about buildings or where they build or where they live. And so I think just being cognizant of how to message is important. So I just want to acknowledge that sometimes the scare tactic can alienate rather than depicting this as an opportunity to reimagine our buildings and our landscapes.
Excellent. Thank you. Summer.
Yeah, it's really good feedback to hear. I do think one of the ways we try to communicate this is without acting. It also costs the region significantly in terms of money and quality of life and safety. And so it's not just the cost of action, it's the cost of inaction. I do think that as we work on these plans and engage communities, the ability to articulate these adaptations through more visionary lenses, that we actually are having the opportunity to transform places, to connect more with the Bay. We're improving ecology and getting a lot of additional benefits that will accrue from these types of projects and policies. So I think getting people, organized and energetic around a vision is a helpful way. But we definitely hear from decision makers on a regular basis. How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to have infrastructure finance districts? Are we going to get state money? What about the feds? And so we at OneShoreline are certainly called upon by elected officials who are, being responsive to their constituents about, what does this mean? Are we paying for this on our own? Are we raising taxes? So I think it's a conversation that, the question gets called whether or not we lead with it, and having a sense of, the size of that number and the different strategies like Colleen was highlighting to get there through private development, public investment, one project at a time or a big giant project down the road, is really part of gaining the alignment and momentum that we need to get these types of efforts in the ground and these policies adopted. So I definitely hear the input and do agree with it in some ways. That answering the question about what it costs when we might not know what it is sometimes feels a bit premature. But I think it is we do have to figure out how to get this stuff paid for at the same time.
Okay, very good. Emma?
Thank you, Stas. I think everyone has summed it up really well. I would just, I guess, highlight a little bit about what Summer just said about that visioning and that joyful aspect. I think a lot of the work being done now in the sea level rise space is really focused on that community visioning and bringing the community, not just bringing the community along, but consulting the community as these projects are created and dreamed up. And I think that there is kind of a general recognition that that's what needs to happen. Because things haven't been previously landing very well necessarily. And this is also a way to get the public really in the what's the word? Really working at the table and in conversation at the early stages, so that whatever comes out of this actually feels like what was needed by the community as a whole. So a little woo-woo, but I think it's really effective and it's happening more and more.
Very good. Okay. Any last questions before we conclude here? Going once, going twice, going three times. Jessica's gone, right? Jessica Fain, you've left.
I'm here. I'm here.
I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Jessica, well, you have the last word here.
Okay. Oh, there's so much pressure there. Well, I think that was a great comment to end on. I agree with the speaker that, modeling is incredibly important and can really help us focus. I think the point of putting out those big numbers like that is not to say we need a fundraise for, $100 billion. It's to say we don't have $100 billion. And so what we need to do is prioritize. We need to think about those projects that need to happen first. We need to think about multi-benefit projects. We need to think about ways to communicate that with our decision makers, our local governments, our councils, to really make the case for this issue, because sea level rise is something people think is like a far off issue in the future when it's really not. And I think modeling and all of this planning work that we're doing isn't just to create more plans. It's really to try to think about how we can get the first projects done and really get this momentum going, because it's going to be a long haul. So that's my final word.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me conclude with a couple of summary statements. First of all, as most of you know, as it's difficult for anybody not to know, we're in a much more adversarial situation with all of these ideas than we were 12 months ago, and the change in administration has a lot to do with that. We heard from our friends at Rotterdam and in Singapore that you have the kind of modeling that we maybe need to pay some attention to. The Port of Rotterdam acts as a regional mover of a lot of action, and you can see the huge amount of space that they occupy. So when they do things and they're investing in things, that has implications. From Matthias Bos, we saw how Singapore is developing a whole national strategy, apparently, around this. And one of the things that it's doing is it's moved its port space away from a vulnerable area and moved it to a higher area. And some of that discussion we heard from Brad about the changes in the seawalls and in the protections. And we've heard from Jessica about how BCDC is working with shoreline communities to develop different plans. We heard from Emma about some of the finance plans that are available from SB1. And we heard from Colleen about strategies that are available that are beginning to get integrated into the system. Megan's pointed out that mitigation could be one of the ways to go here, and integrating those mitigations. And Summer talked about a holistic approach for San Mateo County, which is probably our most vulnerable county in the Bay Area. So the ports have a mandate to do that. San Francisco is very much involved, and it's partnering with the city because you can't cut one jurisdiction off from the other. You heard Colleen also talking about the need to partner with the airport, with Alameda, and with Oakland along those lines. Christine's taken a more modest approach with the living shoreline. And Adrian down in Los Angeles has been developing a long-term strategy for the Port of Los Angeles based on the vulnerabilities of their terminals. I want to go back to a point that Jessica made, which is that we need to be focusing on what's at the water and working from there. In one case, Singapore has moved their assets to a different place. And in another, you heard that they built a barrier and a more or less retention pond to be able to address those things. And when Emery was talking, I was very much thinking about the point that he was making about modeling and how both Singapore and Rotterdam are really looking long-term at how those things are moving, and particularly over the fact that they are both now thinking about 2-meter sea rise solutions. And then we've got our friends in the Mississippi who've got very serious problems, flooding, low water, the impacts of hurricanes. Sean referenced the Bonnie Carey having to be opened on several occasions to deal with higher water. You heard from Deb about the shortfall that we have in the lock and dam system, which goes to the greater issue of a growing failure in the United States to address infrastructure. We may have a way to focus that attention through sea level rise and resiliency that brings everybody together, because the issues of rising salinity from sea level rise is impacting Florida. It's impacting the East Coast. They're also having flooding issues. Whenever you get a huge bad rainstorm on the East Coast now, you have flooding in New York City. We should be able to start pulling those resources together. And here in California, we can be a pilot for that. And the pioneering effort that BCDC is doing in terms of shoreline adaptation helps us focus. But Emery's got a point. We've got to move much faster, and we've got to move in a more strategic way. And I believe his modeling notion is the way to go. And it means that we're going to have to start making more choices faster and making some decisions about what's most important and what is not. And that is going to put us in a very different place than we have been in the past. And this is going to happen in an environment where permitting is going to need to happen at a far faster pace. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for their participation. We've been doing this since 2019. We've gotten the ports very involved in this, and they are taking a leadership role. But I have to thank a lot of the other people who've come along and helped us out. Jessica, you, and Brenda. I think this is the first time we missed Brenda. And I want to thank this panel for the work that you've done and our other panelists. We are going to make sure that your panels are out on video, so you'll be able to get your own panel and use that how you wish. At the Propeller Club, we are a steward and an advocate for the maritime industry. But the maritime industry is no longer an island unto itself. As Jessica and our other speakers have been pointing out, we're all, so to speak, in the same boat. And on that note, I wish you well. Thank you all very much, and best wishes for your efforts. And we have a long slog ahead, and I wish all of you who are out there fighting that fight the best. Thank you, and best wishes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.